Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Fantasy Birds. Today, we're going to be talking about bust potentially in fantasy football 2021 at their ADP average draft position, guys that we think could disappoint this year if drafted at their current positions. Let me know in the comments what you think about these guys on this list. Do you think they're going to be actually good players or any other guys that you think belong on this list bust coming into the 2021 season? But let's not waste your time. Let's hop right into the guys that we think are going to disappoint in 2021. The first guy on our list is going to be David Montgomery for the Chicago Bears. Last year, a 7th to 8th round pick. And if you got him on your team, you were very excited about this. Ended up as the number 4 overall running back in half PPR leagues. From a year ago, actually one of the most traded players in fantasy. This is due to his high volume in the beginning of the year, but really not efficient numbers. He was getting the volume as of an RB1, RB2 kind of back, but he wasn't putting up good stats, and that's why it led people to get frustrated with him and get him off their teams. However, if you stuck it out or if you did end up trading for David Montgomery, the last 6 games of the year, he could have won you a championship. Let's take a look at why we not like him coming into the 2021 season. So he's going as a 4th-round pick right now, 37 overall ADP. And I just don't see how he can hit this ceiling. From a year ago, 65% of his fantasy points all came in those 6 weeks that we talked about. And these 6 weeks might have been the easiest stretch for a running back all of last year. We're talking Green Bay twice, Houston, Detroit, Jacksonville, and Minnesota, all abysmal run defenses that David Montgomery just took advantage of. These run defense were easily bottom 10 in the league. David Montgomery over 150 fantasy points in these 6 combined games, but that was, like I said, 65% of his points. The first 9-10 games of the year, he was not doing much at all. In fact, 7 of the first 9 games from a season ago, he was under 65 yards rushing. Okay, so 7 of those 9 weeks, you're not even getting 65 yards on the ground. Really not a running back that I want to trust in the 4th round, spend a high priority pick on. And let's look at why he was so efficient down the line. Well, we talked about the run defense, how they're actually disgustingly bad. But also, Tariq Cohen tearing his ACL last year, this gave room for David Montgomery to absolutely hog every single target, every single carry in this backfield. Cordero Patterson, the only other running back, quote unquote, you want to put it in there. Cordero Patterson, a bust as a wide receiver for the Vikings, goes to Chicago and they insert him as a running back because they have no other option. You saw how that worked out, and he's no longer even on the team. So Cordero Patterson, really not even a running back. They just had to use him. But David Montgomery really had nothing in the backfield to compete with from a year ago. That changes this year. Tariq Cohen is back. He's going to be that receiving back, that 3rd down, little shifty back to move the chains. David Montgomery, last year, his receptions in the passing game actually doubled from his rookie season. 25 catches in his rookie year, 54 catches last year, over doubled from his rookie year. And that is going to drop significantly with Tariq Cohen coming back. We know Tariq Cohen, his specialty is that Darren Sproles kind of shifty back in backfield, coming out, getting those catches. So that targets are going to drop for David Montgomery, and those receiving yards and catches are going to drop. So that's a huge part of it. However, not only is Tariq Cohen coming back, but they also signed Damian Williams, formerly of the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, he sat out last year for COVID. He had to get it all together. We get it. But he's back. Could have been the Super Bowl MVP. So this guy is not trash. He's going to demand a share of the volume in this backfield. For a guy who's competing with 2 other people, Damian Williams and Tariq Cohen, I don't see how David Montgomery can get that target, that volume share from a year ago that put him as the number 4 running back in fantasy. I don't see it happen. I don't want to have a committee running back for an offense that doesn't score a lot of points with the Chicago Bears, even though their offense should be a little bit better with a Justin Fields or Andy Dalton, whoever they decide to go with. David Montgomery, without that easy schedule at the end of last year, he is not a top 10 running back. It's not even a top 15 running back for what he was doing early in this season. So all this being said, I'm off on David Montgomery. I don't think the volume's going to be there with the Damian Williams and Tariq Cohen showing up this season. I'm off on David Montgomery, my number 1 bust for fantasy football in 2021. Next guy I want to talk about is Adam Thielen, Mr. 1-9 for the Minnesota Vikings. Very stellar season the last 3 years. However, the past season with Justin Jefferson coming into this offense, he's been touchdown dependent, okay? With Steph Diggs as his other wide receiver in Minnesota, Adam Thielen was clearly the number 1, and Steph Diggs was like a deep threat kind of thing. Steph Diggs forces his way out, not happy with that, goes to Buffalo, and we see what he did last year. But Adam Thielen, he's clearly number 2 wide receiver to Justin Jefferson in this offense. 14 touchdowns last year from Adam Thielen. That's third in the league for receivers. That's where his fantasy points came from, right? But let's look deeper into this number, 14 touchdowns. In the end zone, he had 12 targets from a year ago. He caught 8 of 12 targets. Easily number one in the league. That efficiency will drop. There's no doubt about it. You cannot repeat those kind of numbers. Not only did he catch 8 out of 12 passes in the end zone, but he actually caught 84% of his passes in the red zone. This is also top of the league. This is better than a Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill type numbers. These numbers will decrease coming into this year. In addition, once Justin Jefferson settled himself as the number one wide receiver for this team, after week 11, Adam Thielen had less than 100 receiving yards in each game after that point. We saw as the season went on, his receptions and receiving yards slowly decreased. Justin Jefferson more of a factor in that offense, with Dalvin Cook leading the charge, of course. Adam Thielen, without this volume, with Dalvin Cook eating those yards, with Justin Jefferson being the number one guy there, without that touchdown efficiency, Adam Thielen's not going to be able to duplicate those numbers. 14 touchdowns is not realistic coming into this year. And he's actually 25th in receiving yards from last year. So with all that being said, 25th in receiving yards, third in touchdowns, that number is going to decrease. We know that for a fact. Adam Thielen is not going to be a fourth-round pick for me. He's currently going in the early fifth round, late fourth round. I'm not buying him there. I cannot see him duplicating his numbers from a year ago. Adam Thielen, a bust for me this year. Last guy on our list is going to be Mike Evans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 13 touchdowns for Mike Evans a year ago. That was a career high for him, so no wonder he had a pretty solid season. However, do we see this touchdown production continuing? Well, yes, Tom Brady's in town. He's a much better quarterback than Jameis Winston. But Jameis Winston's problem wasn't throwing touchdowns. It was just interceptions. So the volume is going to be there for Mike Evans. However, a career high in touchdowns last year, is that going to continue? I don't think so. His career average is around 8 touchdowns. I feel like his numbers are going to be more similar to around 7, 8, 9 touchdowns this year. So 13 touchdowns is a little bit too high to predict for this year. And Tom Brady last year threw the most touchdown passes in his career since he won MVP in 2007. So we don't expect Tom Brady to throw for another 40 touchdowns this year. More game manager style, rely on that defense, run the ball, and make the passes when he needs to be. So I don't see Tom Brady going all over the field, throwing to every single wide receiver again this year. Actually, once Antonio Brown was a part of this team, Antonio Brown actually had more catches than Mike Evans in the last 8 games of the season. Mike Evans not getting the volume in this offense, really only the touchdowns, and we can't predict a career high in touchdowns next year for Mike Evans, okay? Last year, 1,006 receiving yards. That was second lowest in Mike Evans' career, okay? So we're not even predicting that the volume is coming down. It has come down. It was down last year, and it's going to come down even more this year. Second lowest receiving yards. And actually, in 7 games last year, he had 3 or less catches in those games. Okay, so we're talking about 7 different games where he's got 3 catches or less. That's not a wide receiver I want to draft in the 4th round. I don't see the upside in Mike Evans. I think it's only downhill from here in fantasy. I think he's still going to be a great weapon for Tom Brady and that Buccaneers offense that's going to be dominant. However, without that touchdown upside, I don't see how you can justify taking him in the early 5th round in the number 1 spot on that team. But those are our guys that we predict are going to bust this year in fantasy football, just based on their ADP. Not guys I totally think are going to be disappointing this year and just stink up the joint. Just guys at their ADP, I do not see them hitting that upside. And I think it'd be smart to stay away from these guys in fantasy football 2021. But we thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.